Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the darkest corners of America's wilderness, places where the trail ends, the road bends, and the night swallows every sound. I'll be sharing a collection of true encounters and chilling legends from remote mountains, shadowed forests, and lonely backroads across the country. These aren't campfire myths. These are real experiences that linger long after the sun goes down. So grab a blanket, kill the lights, and settle in for a journey where beauty meets terror. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your own eerie stories in the comments. Now, let's begin. 1. The Woman by the Mile Marker. It was close to midnight when I left the last little town behind me. I'd been driving for hours in steady rain, the kind that soaks into everything and makes the air feel heavy, like it's pressing down on you. The highway was empty except for me, just a ribbon of blacktop winding through the hills, mile markers ticking by one after another. My wipers kept time like a metronome, smearing the water across the windshield instead of clearing it. The glare from my own headlights bounced off the wet road and back into my eyes, so everything beyond that narrow tunnel of light was just darkness. I passed mile marker 46 without thinking much about it, but the one after, that's where I saw her. She was standing just off the shoulder, facing the road. A pale dress clung to her like wet paper, her hair matted flat against her face. She didn't wave or flag me down, just stood there, head tilted a fraction to the side. My first thought was maybe her car had broken down, but there was no vehicle, no movement, no sound except the rain tapping on the roof. As I rolled past, I felt this wrongness in my chest, like my heart had skipped a beat but was still trying to catch up. I checked the rear view, half expecting to see her still standing there in the glow of my taillights, but the shoulder behind me was empty. A mile later, the beam of my headlights caught her again. Same pale dress, same tilt of the head. This time she was standing right at the edge of the asphalt, rain pouring off her in steady sheets. My throat went dry. I kept driving, but slower now. My hands clamped too tight on the wheel. I glanced in the mirror, nothing but water streaking the glass. By mile marker 49, I was starting to talk to myself just to fill the air, telling myself it was some weird trick of the light, maybe a reflection off the road signs. I didn't believe it, but it kept me from thinking too hard about the alternative. Then I saw her at mile marker 50. She wasn't standing back this time. She was right there in my lane, so close I could see her face in the headlights. The skin around her eyes was grey, sunken, and where her eyes should have been, nothing. Just dark, wet hollows. Her mouth didn't move, but I felt this pressure in my ears, like the moment before a storm breaks. I swerved hard into the opposite lane to miss her, tires hissing on the wet pavement. When I looked back, the road was empty again, just rain bouncing in the beams. My pulse was so loud in my ears I almost didn't hear it, the faint sound of bare feet slapping against wet asphalt somewhere behind me. I didn't look again. The miles after that blurred together. My focus tunneled down to just the yellow lines in the next curve. I must have driven another 20 minutes before I saw lights ahead, the faint orange glow of a gas station sign. I pulled in too fast, water spraying up from the tires, and parked right under the awning. My hands were shaking so badly I had to take a minute before I could even open the door. Inside, the gas station was empty except for the cashier, a man maybe in his 60s with deep lines under his eyes. I grabbed a coffee I didn't want just to have an excuse to stand under the fluorescent lights. When I went to pay, he looked me over for a moment, then asked, "You come up from the South Road tonight?" I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, why?" He didn't answer right away, just handed me my change, then said, "You see her?" The coffee cup felt slick in my hand. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. He tapped the counter once, almost like he was thinking about saying something else, but instead just said, "Best not to stop, if you ever do. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't want answers. When I finally left the gas station, the rain had let up, just a mist hanging over the parking lot. I climbed into the car, set the coffee in the holder, and started the engine. For a second, I thought I caught movement in the mirror, a pale shape near the pumps, but when I turned around, the lot was empty. I pulled out onto the road, the wipers squeaking over glass now mostly clear, but here's the part I can't shake, even now. As I merged back onto the highway, I passed mile marker 51, and there, just beyond the edge of my headlights, I swear I saw her again, standing in the wet grass, head tilted, watching me go. I didn't look in the mirror this time. 2. The rain-soaked stranger on Highway 9. Rain has a way of making Highway 9 feel longer than it is. The road winds through low hills and stretches of forest so thick the trees seem to lean over you, their branches dripping steady streams of water onto the already soaked pavement. That night, I was tired. I'd worked a double shift at the mill and just wanted to get home, pull off my boots, and let the sound of rain on my roof put me to sleep. My headlights cut a narrow path ahead, everything beyond it swallowed in darkness and the constant silver shimmer of water. The wipers thumped back and forth, barely keeping pace with the downpour. I first saw him just past mile marker 23. He was walking along the shoulder, head down, wearing nothing but jeans and a dark flannel shirt that was plastered to his frame. No umbrella, no jacket, no hat. Just moving forward in that steady, deliberate way, his arms hanging loose at his sides. Out here, in that weather, it didn't make sense. The nearest house was miles back, and there were no other cars on the road. I slowed, more out of instinct than anything else. My mama raised me to stop for folks in need, and the thought of just passing him by didn't sit right. When I pulled up alongside him, he didn't look over. I rolled the passenger window down a crack and called out, "You need a ride somewhere?" My voice felt small against the roar of the rain. After a beat, he nodded once and came around the front of the car. He slid into the passenger seat without saying a word, dripping all over the floor mat. The air in the cabin changed the moment he shut the door, colder, heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent like old pennies or rusted tools. I tried to make small talk, asking where he was headed. He didn't answer, just stared out the window at the blur of trees and rain-slick asphalt sliding past. Every few seconds, the headlights would catch his reflection in the glass, and I could see his face, pale, with sharp lines around the mouth, lips slightly parted as if he was on the verge of saying something but never did. His eyes never left the darkness outside. We drove in silence for a while. The only sounds were the wipers, the hum of the tires, and the rain pounding the roof. I started feeling uneasy, though I couldn't say why exactly. Maybe it was the way he sat, too still, too rigid, like he was holding himself in place. Or maybe it was that smell, the coppery tang that seemed to be growing stronger, filling my nose until I could almost taste it. About 10 minutes later, we came to a long curve in the road. I slowed to take it, my eyes flicking between the pavement ahead and the rearview mirror. Something about the curve made me glance toward the passenger seat again. It was empty. I slammed the brakes without thinking, the tires skidding on the wet road. The seat was soaked, water pooling in the cracked vinyl where he'd been sitting just moments before. I twisted around, scanning the back seat, the shoulder of the road, the trees beyond. Nothing. The passenger door was still shut tight. I hadn't heard it open, hadn't heard anything at all. Then my headlights caught something in the ditch up ahead. I rolled forward slowly, the beam cutting across a twisted shape half submerged in the muddy water. It was a car, an older model, the front end crumpled against a tree. The water was running fast around it, almost up to the windows. Inside, slumped against the driver's seat, was a man. Even from the road, I could see the dark flannel shirt clinging to his shoulders. My stomach turned cold. I knew it was him. The same shirt, the same stillness. The rain streaked down the glass of the window, distorting his face, but I thought I saw his eyes were open, watching me. I backed up, my hands shaking on the wheel. The urge to get out and check on him wrestled with something deeper, something primal, telling me not to. The road ahead seemed to stretch into forever, the rain falling harder than before, like it wanted to bury the scene behind me. I kept driving, didn't look back. For the rest of the trip, every time my headlights brushed the tree line, I thought I saw movement just beyond it. A shadow walking at the same pace as my car, head down, arms hanging loose at its sides. When I finally reached my driveway, I sat there for a long time, engine running, the rain drumming the roof. My passenger seat was still wet. The smell of pennies lingered, and sometimes when it rains like that, I swear I still catch a glimpse of him in the glass, sitting right there beside me, staring out into the dark. Three-porch light in the hollow. It was sometime after 10 when I realized I'd taken the wrong turn. I'd been winding through back roads for the better part of an hour, my phone's GPS spinning uselessly before finally giving up when the signal dropped out. The rain hadn't let up since sunset. Thick, heavy drops hammering the windshield until my wipers could barely keep pace. The road ahead was little more than two slick ruts between walls of trees, their branches bowing low from the weight of the water. Every few minutes, I'd pass an old fence post or a rusted-out mailbox, but no houses, no signs of life. Then I saw it. Through the veil of rain, down in the hollow to my right, there was a light, a soft yellow glow, steady and warm, spilling from what looked like a front porch. I slowed, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, and spotted a narrow lane cutting through the trees. Something about that glow made me think of dry clothes and hot coffee, maybe someone who could point me back toward the main road. The lane was muddy, the car's tires slipping more than once before the trees opened into a small clearing. The house sat there, old but cared for, its porch light casting a pale circle on the wet ground. I parked near the edge of the yard, killed the engine, and stepped out. The rain was louder without the car between me and the storm, drumming on the hood of my jacket and soaking my jeans before I reached the steps. I knocked once, hard enough to be heard over the rain. A woman's voice answered, warm and calm. "Come on in." It was the kind of voice that made you think of wood stoves and blankets. I waited for the door to open, but it didn't. I knocked again, and the same voice repeated, "Come on in," just as steady, just as welcoming. Something in me hesitated, but the cold was creeping deep into my bones. I turned the knob. The door swung open with a slow groan, revealing a dimly lit front room. There was no one there. The air inside was heavy, damp in a way that felt different from the rain. It was the smell of wet earth, like a cellar that had never seen sunlight. My boots left dark, muddy prints across warped floorboards as I stepped inside. The light came from a single lamp on a side table, its shade stained and tilted slightly to one side. "Hello!" My voice felt swallowed by the room. No answer. I took another step. The floor creaked under my weight, the boards flexing slightly as though they were thinner than they should be. I glanced back toward the door. My footprints were clear, but there were no others. No muddy tracks leading deeper into the house. No scuffs on the warped wood. The rain outside seemed to grow louder. At first, I thought it was just the storm worsening, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't on the roof, it was in the walls. A deep, rushing patter that made the plaster seem to shiver. I stepped toward the hallway. but the air felt heavier the farther I went, pressing against my chest until I found it hard to breathe. Somewhere ahead, in the dark of the hall, I thought I heard the woman's voice again. This time, it wasn't warm. It was low, urgent, the words just out of reach, carried on the sound of the rain. My hand brushed the wall, and the plaster was damp, cold enough to sting my fingertips. The smell of earth was stronger now, almost metallic underneath. I backed toward the door, each step slower than the last. When I stepped outside, the yard was pitch black. The porch light was out. I turned toward where my car had been, but there was only darkness and the sound of rain on leaves. No lane, no clearing, no house behind me. The hollow was just trees, endless and dripping. I don't remember getting back to the road. I just know that when I finally saw the highway signs, my clothes were still soaked through, and the smell of wet earth clung to me for days, no matter how many times I washed them. And sometimes, when it rains hard enough, I swear I can still hear her voice, telling me to come on in. For the sound under the bridge. It was sometime past midnight when I came to that old steel bridge on Route 31. Rain had been hammering the roof of my truck for hours, the kind that makes your wipers useless after 2 seconds. The creek below had turned into a raging black ribbon, swollen over its banks. My headlights caught something pale moving in the water. At first I thought it was a deer, but it rolled in a way no animal should. Loose, boneless almost, bending wrong with the current. I pulled over without really deciding to, stepping out into the cold downpour. The bridge groaned under me. Water sheeted off my jacket as I leaned over the railing. The thing wasn't just drifting, it was turning slowly, like it knew I was there. I never saw a face, just this awful slack shape that should have sunk but didn't. Then I heard it. A hum. Low, steady, deep enough to feel in my teeth. It was coming from right under me, traveling through the wet metal rail and into my bones. I froze. The shape in the water was gone now, but the humming was getting louder, vibrating the steel so hard I had to grip the railing to stay steady. When the whole bridge started trembling, I backed away. My boots slapped the wet planks until I was back in the truck, shoving it into gear. In my mirror, the bridge was still shaking, though no cars had touched it. I've avoided Route 31 ever since. But on quiet nights, when rain taps the windows, I swear I can hear that same hum, low and steady, like it's traveling through the ground, looking for me. Five, the lantern on Birch Road. It was sometime past midnight when I found myself driving down Birch Road, a stretch of cracked pavement that cuts through a low, wet valley between two ridges. The rain had been steady for hours, the kind that seeps into your sleeves no matter how quick you move. My wipers kept a sluggish rhythm, barely keeping up with the water, and the headlights just pushed back enough of the darkness to remind me how much of it there still was. About halfway through that valley, I saw it. A soft, amber glow up ahead, swaying gently in the rain. At first, I thought it might be a porch light from one of the few cabins scattered along the ridge, but as I came closer, I realized it was out in the open, right by the edge of the road. It wasn't a firefly, and it wasn't the glare of my own headlights bouncing off something. It was a lantern, the old kind, glass-paneled with a brass top. Its light was too steady to be from the rain, too warm for anything electric. I eased off the gas, leaning forward over the wheel. There was no figure, no shadow to suggest someone holding it. Just the lantern itself, hanging in mid-air at about shoulder height, swinging like it was caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. My tires hissed on the wet pavement as I slowed to a crawl, staring at it. For a second, I thought I saw fingers. Pale, thin, curling around the handle, but the rain distorted everything, and my eyes weren't sure what they were seeing. Then it moved. The lantern didn't fall or flicker. It just started gliding across the narrow shoulder, slipping between the trees. I didn't move my car, didn't follow it physically, but my eyes tracked it as it weaved through the undergrowth, lighting up wet leaves and dripping branches as it went. The deeper it got into the woods, the darker everything around it seemed to grow, like the light wasn't just cutting through the darkness, but pulling it toward itself. I don't know how long I sat there, engine idling, watching it go. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe a full minute. But then, just before the glow was swallowed entirely by the trees, it stopped. The swinging slowed. I thought I saw that same pale hand again, knuckles sharp against the glass. And then, nothing. The light winked out like it had been snuffed between wet fingers. The rain sounded louder without it. The forest was just a wall of black. No movement, no shape, no sign of anyone there at all. I drove the rest of the way home with that empty patch of trees in my rearview mirror, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the lantern had been meant for me, and that maybe, if I'd opened my door and stepped out, I wouldn't have come back. Six, the old storefront on Main Street. It was sometime past 9 when the rain started turning into sheets, heavy enough that the wipers barely made a difference. I'd been driving since mid-afternoon, heading west after visiting a friend 2 counties over, when the interstate signs started to blur into streaks of green and white. I missed an exit, maybe 2, and by the time I realized it, my phone had no signal and the gas gauge was edging toward empty. I saw a weathered sign for Main Street pointing off to the right, and decided I'd take my chances finding a gas station there. The road narrowed quickly, streetlights becoming fewer and farther apart until they were gone completely. The rain eased a little as I rolled into town. But the place looked abandoned. Every shopfront I passed was dark. No neon, no cars, not even the faint blue flicker of a television behind curtains. Store windows were coated in dust and streaked with grime, most of the signs too faded to read. Then I saw it, halfway down the block, an old storefront lit with a pale, golden glow. Its glass was warped and bubbled, the kind you see in buildings that haven't been touched since the 40s. Rainwater ran down it in crooked lines, distorting the shapes inside. The sign above was so faded, I could only make out the outline of letters. Maybe a general store, maybe something else. But it was open. Or at least, lit. I parked right in front, leaving the engine running for a moment as I watched through the glass. Inside, rows of shelves stood tall and close together, crammed with jars and boxes whose labels were yellowed with age. Oil lamps, half a dozen of them, cast a dim glow that wavered over the walls. Behind a counter near the back stood an old man, maybe in his 70s, maybe older. He was tall and thin, wearing a pressed shirt with suspenders, his hands resting on the counter. He didn't seem to be doing anything, just standing there, looking forward. When I stepped inside, the bell over the door gave a dull, tired ring. The first thing that hit me was the air. It was cold, far colder than it should have been for early autumn. My breath came out in soft clouds in front of me. The smell was damp, like wet stone and something faintly metallic. The man's eyes followed me as I walked toward him, but he didn't smile. He didn't even blink. I gave a small wave, feeling a little awkward. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Could you tell me if there's a gas station nearby?" He didn't answer. His lips stayed pressed in a straight, thin line, and his hands didn't move. His gaze wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either, just steady. I tried again. I think I got turned around coming off the interstate, just looking to get back on. My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. Nothing, not even a shift of weight. I glanced at the shelves as I passed one. Dust lay thick over the tops of jars filled with preserved vegetables, the brine cloudy with age. Boxes of soap looked brittle, their cardboard flaking at the corners. Everything looked untouched for decades, except for the faint glow of those oil lamps. Something made me turn toward the front window then. Through the warped glass, the rain still fell. But the street outside didn't look right. It wasn't dark anymore. Instead, pale daylight streamed in, and there were people walking by. Women in dresses and hats, men in caps, children skipping past. A horse-drawn wagon rattled by, and a man on the sidewalk tipped his hat toward the store as if greeting whoever was inside. But the sound of the rain still filled my ears, pattering steadily on the roof above. I blinked, my stomach tightening. The air was still cold, still damp. I turned back to the old man. His face hadn't moved, but his eyes. God, I swear they looked sharper now, like he was studying me. The reflection in the glass wasn't showing me. It was showing the store as it must have looked half a century ago, full and alive. The counter was stacked with goods, the shelves neatly organized. A young man behind the register laughing with a customer. But when I looked at the real counter in front of me, dust, stains on the wood, and the same silent, unmoving figure. My breath came faster. I muttered something like, "Sorry for bothering you," and turned toward the door. The bell rang again as I stepped outside, but the sound was different, clearer, higher, like a healthy bell, not the dull, rusted clink from before. The street outside was wrong. The rain had stopped completely, and the air felt heavier somehow. The storefronts were all lit, people moving in and out of them. Voices carried down the street, but they were muffled, like hearing a conversation from underwater. I spun toward my car, except it wasn't there. The space where I'd parked was empty, the curb wet but bare. My pulse hammered in my ears. When I turned back toward the store, the glass reflected night again. Rain pouring down, and I saw myself standing inside at the counter, motionless, my hands resting on the wood, staring out. The real door was still in front of me, but I didn't open it. I started walking down the street instead, hoping to see some landmark, some road sign that would lead me back. Every step I took, the sound of my shoes on the wet pavement felt louder, echoing in the stillness. The people I passed didn't meet my eyes. They didn't speak to me. Some had faces that seemed just a little too smooth, too still. When I reached the corner and looked back, the store was dark. No lamps, no man, just a dusty, empty window staring out into the rain. And I don't remember the drive home. I only remember pulling into my driveway hours later, my gas tank nearly empty, the dashboard clock flashing some impossible hour. Sometimes I pass through small towns when I travel for work, and sometimes, if I'm unlucky, I'll see a glow through old glass and think of that night. I don't stop anymore. Seven, rain in the attic. It had been raining all afternoon when I pulled into that old place. The kind of soft, steady rain that doesn't feel urgent at first, but seeps into your clothes, your bones. I was house-sitting for a friend, Meredith, someone I'd known from college who had moved back to West Virginia to care for her mother. The house had been in her family for generations, perched up on a hillside just off a narrow, winding road that I nearly missed in the mist. She'd warned me it was old and creaky, but she'd left a key under the doormat and promised me the heat worked fine. By the time I'd gotten the door unlocked, I was shivering. The inside smelled faintly of cedar and something else. Not exactly mildew, but close. The place was dim, lit only by the light from the rain-clouded windows. It wasn't the kind of house where you flipped on bright overhead lights. Instead, there were old lamps scattered around the living room, their shades yellowed with age, throwing soft halos into corners. I'd been in old houses before. My grandmother's place had that same kind of hush, as if the walls remembered conversations long after the people were gone. And like my grandmother's house, this one had its little noises, boards creaking when no one was walking on them, faint ticking in the walls, the sigh of wind slipping under doorframes. By nightfall, the rain had picked up. It rattled against the windows and whispered in the chimney. I sat in the kitchen reading while the space heater hummed, the kind of quiet night that makes you drowsy without realizing it. I remember glancing at the clock a little past midnight when I heard it. At first I thought it was just more rain, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the uneven patter on the roof or the gurgle in the gutters. It was steady, measured, drip, drip, drip. It came from above me. I set the book down and stood there listening, thinking maybe the roof had sprung a leak and water was pooling somewhere. Meredith hadn't said anything about the attic, but in a place this old, you expect trouble spots. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and headed upstairs. The house's staircase was steep, the kind where you feel like you're climbing into the dark belly of something. At the top, the hall was narrow, with faded wallpaper curling in the seams. The attic door was a plain wooden panel with a pull string hanging from the ceiling. When I tugged it, the ladder came down with a groan, bringing with it a breath of cold air. I climbed up, the flashlight beam catching motes of dust drifting lazily in the air. The attic was bigger than I'd expected, stretching low under the roof beams. Old trunks, broken furniture, and boxes were scattered around like forgotten sentinels. The floorboards flexed and popped under my weight. I listened. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was still there, steady as before. I swept the beam around, expecting to see a puddle under a leak, but the boards were dry. No water stains, no wet insulation hanging from the rafters. I moved toward the sound, the floor cold enough under my socks to make me wince. The beam caught on a shape in the far corner. A small wooden chest, maybe 2 feet wide, sitting flush against the wall. It looked handmade, the kind of thing someone's grandfather might have built. The latch was simple, unpolished metal. The dripping sound was coming from inside it. I knelt down, hesitating a moment. The air here was colder, enough that I could see my breath. I put my ear to the wood. The sound was louder now, but not just dripping. There was a faint, irregular noise beneath it, something I couldn't place at first. Like a low, broken murmur. I unlatched the chest. When I opened it, a rush of damp air spilled out, heavy and cold, like stepping into a cave. My flashlight beam caught something impossible. Inside the chest, rain was falling. Not just water pooling, but rain dropping from somewhere above into a darkness that had no bottom. The drops vanished before they struck anything, disappearing into the black like they'd fallen off the edge of the world. And under that sound, faint but clear now, was the unmistakable sound of someone sobbing. It wasn't the kind of crying you make when you're startled or hurt. It was slow, aching, helpless. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten even before you understand it. I don't know how long I knelt there. My brain kept trying to offer explanations, a trick of the light, a hidden speaker, some kind of old water trap. But none of that explained the cold air on my skin, or the smell of wet leaves and earth coming out of the box. I closed the chest and sat back. The attic felt smaller now, the air heavier. The dripping stopped, but the quiet that replaced it was worse. I went back downstairs, trying to shake it off. Told myself maybe I'd imagined crying. Maybe it was just the wind in the rafters. But lying in bed, I could hear it again, faint through the floorboards above me. The steady drip, and every so often that thin, wavering sob. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I told myself I wouldn't go back up there. I made coffee, sat in the kitchen watching the rain through the window, trying to forget about it. But by afternoon, the sound had returned, louder this time. I tried calling Meredith, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I even thought about just locking the attic and ignoring it until she came back. But something about it wouldn't let me. The crying. It sounded worse. When I went back up, the chest was where I'd left it. But now the latch was open. Inside, the rain was falling harder. I could smell the sharp scent of a storm. Ozone, wet soil, that electric tang in the air. And the sobbing was clearer. It sounded close now, almost directly below the surface of that darkness. I leaned closer, and for just a second I thought I saw movement down there. Not a face, not exactly, but the suggestion of someone's outline, blurred as if behind thick glass, their shoulders shaking. Then I heard it. My name, not loud, not shouted, just spoken softly, like a plea. I slammed the chest shut and stumbled back. I stayed in the living room after that, lights on, the space heater running, the TV playing some mindless show just to fill the silence. But even over the noise, I could hear the dripping upstairs. That night, the crying came again. Not from the attic this time, but from outside my bedroom door. I left before sunrise, locking the front door and not looking back. I didn't tell Meredith what I'd seen. She called a week later, thanking me for watching the place, asking if I'd noticed anything odd. I lied. I still dream about that sound. Rain falling into a darkness that swallows it whole, and somewhere deep inside it, someone waiting for me to open the lid again. Eight. The Watcher at the Crossing. It was just past 11 when I came up on the crossing by Logan Creek. I'd taken the back road from Huntington to avoid the highway construction, even though I don't usually like driving that stretch at night. It's narrow, twisting, and the trees grow so close they blot out the moonlight, so your headlights feel like the only thing keeping you from disappearing into the dark. It had been raining steadily for hours, the kind that soaks the world in a sheen of black glass, and the wipers could barely keep up. I knew the crossing was coming up from the way the road flattens and straightens for just 100 yards or so before the tracks. The old wooden barrier's been there forever, warped, chipped paint, half the reflectors missing. There's no gate, just a sign and a few rotting posts. I slowed, not because of any train, but because you always slow there. The asphalt dips just enough to jar your tires, and there's a patch of mud that likes to slide you toward the ditch. That's when I saw him. At first, he was just a shape, dark coat, tall, standing on the far side of the tracks. The rain streaked down in my headlights, making his outline shimmer in and out, like I couldn't quite focus on him. He was right next to the crossing sign, facing the rails, hands buried deep in his pockets. His hair was plastered flat, dripping into his collar. Something about the stillness of him made me think he'd been there for a long time. I eased up on the gas, creeping forward. My first thought was that he'd broken down, maybe lost his footing in the mud, needed a ride into town. Out here, people stop for each other, not because it's safe, but because you don't leave someone stranded on a night like that. The rain hissed against the windshield as I rolled closer. He didn't move, didn't look at me. His eyes, I could see them now in the glow of my high beams, were fixed straight ahead at the empty track, as if he was waiting for something to come rumbling out of the dark. I tapped the horn. The sound cracked through the night, echoing off the trees. He didn't flinch. I tapped it again, longer this time, and that's when he turned. It wasn't that his face was disfigured. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place. But something in the arrangement was wrong. like the proportions had been copied from memory and set just slightly off. Eyes too steady, mouth too still, skin too pale for someone standing in the rain. I felt a cold rush in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. We looked at each other for maybe 2 seconds. Then I shifted into gear and eased across the tracks, telling myself I was overreacting, probably drunk, probably high. Just some local who'd lost track of the time and was too far gone to care who drove by. Except when I checked my rear view, he wasn't by the sign anymore. He was standing in the middle of the road, right where I'd just been. And he was watching my car disappear into the dark. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down. My hands were locked so tight on the wheel my knuckles hurt. The road curved hard right after the crossing, and once the trees closed in again I couldn't see him anymore. But I kept expecting to catch his silhouette in my mirrors, closer than before. By the time I hit the bridge over Logan Creek, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Just a man. Maybe odd-looking, maybe a little out of it, but nothing supernatural. Still, I took the long way home. The next morning, I called my buddy Eric, who's lived in Logan County his whole life. I told him about the man, the rain, the way he stood by the tracks. Eric went quiet for a second, then said, "You were at the crossing by Miller's Field?" "Yeah," he sighed. "You don't go through there in the rain, man." He told me the story, how back in the 1960s, a man named Howard Kane lived in a shack just past the creek, worked odd jobs on the railroad. One night, in a storm, he tried to flag down a train, waving his lantern like something was wrong on the track. The engineer didn't see him in time. They said the brakes screamed for half a mile, but it wasn't enough. Kane was gone before they even reached him. Some folks swore he'd been warned about a washed-out section, that he'd saved the train. Others said there was nothing wrong with the track at all, that he'd just walked out there for no reason. Either way, he was buried in an unmarked grave. Since then, people claimed to see him at the crossing, always in the rain, always staring down the tracks. Some said he waits for a train that never comes. Others said he looks for the one that killed him. I didn't believe it, not really. But a week later, I drove past in daylight just to see. The sign was still there, warped and weathered. The mud patch still glistened at the edge of the road. And in the ditch, I found something half buried in the muck. An old metal lantern, rusted through, the glass shattered. When I picked it up, water poured out of it, even though it hadn't rained in days. I put it back where I found it. That night, lying in bed, I could hear rain on my roof. But the forecast was clear. "9. The radio in the rain. It happened last October, the kind of night that feels like it's been wrung out of a storm cloud and left to drip across the mountains. I'd been driving all day, leaving Boone late in the afternoon after visiting an old friend. My plan was to reach Asheville before midnight, crash at a cheap roadside motel, and head further south the next morning. I should have stayed the night in Boone. I should have listened to the feeling in my gut when the first drop started hitting the windshield and the sky dropped lower, pressing on the mountaintops like it was trying to smother them. By the time I'd cleared the last gas station outside of town, the rain was already coming down in sheets. The road was one of those winding 2-lane highways, the kind that keeps you between rock face and drop-off. My headlights didn't do much more than catch the downpour head on. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, radio low, just trying to concentrate on the curves. Somewhere past the halfway point between Boone and Asheville, my radio cut out, not slowly, not with that fading hiss like when you're losing signal, but just gone. Dead air. Then came static, thin and needling, like a swarm of bees in my speakers. I figured the storm was screwing with the reception, so I reached over to switch it off. That's when I heard it. My name, clear as day, spoken in a woman's voice I didn't recognize. It wasn't a shout, more like a careful whisper. The kind of voice that makes you lean in without thinking. My hand froze over the dial. I thought maybe I'd misheard, that it was just a fluke of the static, but then it came again. Evan. Quiet, deliberate. I looked at the display. No station name, no numbers, just a black rectangle like the thing wasn't even on anymore. I'll tell you this. The sound of your own name in a voice you've never heard will freeze you faster than any cold. My first thought was that it had to be some weird interference, maybe picking up a CB radio or something, but the nearest truck or car was miles ahead or behind me. I hadn't seen a pair of headlights in almost 20 minutes. The rain was still pounding so hard it blurred the edges of the world outside. Then she said it again, softer this time. Pull over. I don't know if it was the strangeness of it or just plain curiosity, but I eased my foot off the gas. My better judgment was screaming at me to keep going, but the voice had a tone to it. Not urgent, not threatening, just expectant, like she already knew I would listen. I found a narrow shoulder by a break in the guardrail and rolled the car to a stop. The rain slowed almost instantly, the sound softening as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. I sat there in the sudden quiet, my breath loud in the cabin. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. No voice, no static, just the soft hiss of water dripping from the trees. I was about to put the car back in gear when I heard it, not from the speakers this time, but from just outside my driver's side window. It was the same voice, same whisper, my name. I turned my head slowly, more afraid of what I might see than anything else. The glass was streaked with water, the outside darkness broken only by the faint reflection of my own face. No one was there. Still, the voice was so close it could have been inches from my ear if not for the glass. That was enough for me. I threw the car in drive, tires spinning on the wet asphalt before catching. My hands were slick on the wheel. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't glance to either side, just kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, praying for the lights of Asheville. The rain picked up again like it was making up for lost time. My radio stayed dead, not even static now, just a cold, empty silence. It stayed that way until I hit the outskirts of the city. I tried to tell myself later that it was just the storm, just bad wiring in the radio and my mind filling in the blanks. But the thing I can't explain, the thing that's kept me from driving that road again, is this. The next morning, when I went out to my car, there were wet handprints, small ones, on the outside of my driver's side window, and they were facing inward. The house beyond the flooded field. It had been raining all day, not the kind of steady, pleasant rain that smells like wet grass and asphalt, but the kind that comes down in sheets, hammering the windshield so hard it feels like it's trying to push you off the road. I'd been driving since morning, cutting through the back roads between Boone and a small town a few hours east. My GPS had given up on me 2 turns ago, claiming I'd arrived at my destination somewhere in the middle of an empty stretch of 2-lane. My phone had 1 bar of signal that winked in and out like a dying flashlight. I wasn't familiar with the area, but I knew enough about the Appalachian backroads to avoid them in bad weather. The rain had turned the ditches into little rivers, mud sliding off the hills in slow brown waves. Still, a road closed sign forced me onto a detour that wound deeper into the countryside. That's when I saw the flooded field. It was the kind of sight that makes you double take. Off to my right, past a sagging barbed wire fence, the land just opened up, a broad, low stretch of ground that must have once been a meadow or pasture. Now it was a shallow lake, rainwater shimmering under the grey afternoon sky. In the middle of it, like an island, was a small house. 2 stories, White siding gone grey, roof pitched steep against the weather. Water lapped at its foundation, ripples spreading from somewhere unseen. But it wasn't the house itself that made me slow down. It was the light in the windows. Warm yellow glows in nearly every pane, flickering like candlelight. The rest of the world was cold, wet, and grey, but here was this island of warmth, floating in the middle of the water. I told myself someone might live there, that maybe they had a landline or could point me back to the highway. It didn't matter that there was no driveway in sight, no mailbox, no visible path to the house. I pulled over and killed the engine. The rain drummed on the roof of the car, then slowed like someone was turning down the volume. I opened the door and stepped into ankle-deep water at the roadside, wading through the ditch before I even realized how cold it was. The field wasn't deep, not at first. I could feel the soft ground under my boots, mud sucking at the soles. Each step sent ripples across the water, the surface trembling all the way out toward the house. It was only halfway across that I realized the lights weren't electric. They danced too much, shadows flickering across the window frames. Candle flames. At least one in every window I could see. And then I noticed the figures. They weren't obvious right away, just vague shapes in the glass. But the closer I got, the more they took form. Tall, still silhouettes, standing directly behind each lit window. Not moving, not swaying, just watching. I stopped mid-step, water soaking into my jeans. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, the kind that beads on your skin. It was so quiet I could hear the tiny lapping sound where the water touched the house's siding. I should have turned back then. I knew it, but there was a pull to that place. Something about the way the candles burned steadily in the damp air, how the figures didn't move at all. My mind kept trying to make it normal, maybe a family trapped by the flood, waiting for help. The water was up to my thighs when I reached the steps. There were only 3 of them, warped and slick, leading to a small covered porch. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and wet earth. I called out, something like, "Hello, I'm lost, I need directions." My voice sounded small against the flat water and grey sky. No one answered. Up close, I could see the nearest figure clearly. A man, maybe, though the candlelight behind him turned his face into a silhouette. He was right up against the glass, forehead nearly touching it, eyes hidden in shadow. His breath didn't fog the pain. I knocked on the door. The sound felt too loud, sharp against the muffled world. Nothing. I tried again. The candlelight flickered once, like a breeze had touched it, but I felt no draft. When I turned to glance at the other windows, my stomach twisted. Every figure, and there were more now, crowding the frames I hadn't noticed before, was facing me, even the ones on the second floor. They hadn't moved. But somehow they were all looking my way. A cold feeling slid up my back, and I stepped down from the porch. The water was higher now, almost to my waist, though it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes since I'd waded in. My boots sank deeper into the mud, pulling at my feet. That's when I heard it. Faint, almost beneath the sound of my own breathing. A sound like murmuring. It wasn't coming from the house. It was all around me, low and indistinct, like a dozen voices speaking under their breath. I took another step backward, eyes on the house. The figures didn't move, the candle flames didn't waver, but the murmuring grew louder. The water rippled at my sides, though there was no wind. Something brushed past my leg under the surface, not hard, but enough to make me stumble. I turned then. I didn't care about the mud or the cold. I just pushed through, each step dragging more than the last. I didn't look back at the house. Not until I was at the fence, pulling myself over the slick wood. That's when I glanced up. The candles were out. Every window was dark. The silhouettes were gone. I scrambled into my car, soaked and shaking. the murmuring still faint in my ears, though I was sure I was alone. My hands slipped on the wheel as I started the engine, tires spinning before catching on the wet gravel. I drove until the road met the highway again, never checking the rearview mirror. Sometimes, when it's raining hard enough, I swear I catch that same flicker of candlelight in the distance. Out past the fields, in places I know there shouldn't be houses at all. And if I look long enough, I start to see shapes in the windows. I never look long enough anymore. The Drifter on Coal Hollow Road. It's one thing to hear stories about Coal Hollow Road, and another to find yourself driving down it in the middle of a storm. I'd been up in Welch that day for work, stuck longer than I planned, and by the time I headed back, the weather had turned mean. Sheets of rain slammed against the windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up. My headlights caught more water than road, and every turn seemed sharper than I remembered, every drop-off deeper. Out there, the mountains close in on you, and the trees on either side look black and endless. I knew the road's reputation: bad wrecks, washed-out stretches, the occasional washed-up body from the creek. But it was the quickest way home. And in that kind of weather, you tell yourself quicker is safer. I was halfway down when I first saw him, just a dark shape against darker rain, moving slow along the shoulder. At first I thought maybe it was a hunter caught out too long, or someone whose truck had broken down. But then my headlights cut through the curtain of water enough to make him out. A man, tall, shoulders hunched against the wind, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. The rain seemed to bead off him instead of soaking in, like the coat was made from something that didn't belong out there. He didn't look up as I approached, just kept walking into the storm, heading the opposite direction. I eased off the gas, thinking maybe I should offer a ride, but something about the way he moved made me hesitate. The storm roared around us, yet his steps were steady, deliberate, like he could walk through a hurricane without losing balance. When I drew close enough to pass, that's when he lifted his head. His face was pale in my beams, washed in the cold light of the storm, and then I saw his eyes. They caught the light like glass. Not like a cat's eyeshine, but as if there was something behind them reflecting me back. Two perfect white pinpoints glowing inside black pools. My stomach dropped. He smiled then, just enough to part his lips and show teeth, thin and too many. And I swear I saw rainwater running between them like it was pouring through. I don't know why I slowed down instead of speeding up, but I did. In the fraction of a second it took for my brain to decide whether to stop or go, I blinked. And he was gone. Not walked away, not stepped off the shoulder. Gone. The place where he'd been was just empty rain, and my headlights showed nothing but the wet sheen of the road. I craned my neck as I drove past, but there was no sign of him in the mirror, not on the shoulder, not in the trees. My skin crawled. I told myself maybe I just lost sight of him, the storm swallowing him up. But that felt like a lie I'd made up too fast. The rest of the drive stretched on forever. Every shadow on the roadside looked like someone standing still. I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see that wide-brimmed hat in the back seat, his eyes catching the reflection of my dashlights. The storm didn't let up, and the wind drove branches into the road. My hands cramped from gripping the wheel too tight. Somewhere near the old coal tipple, I thought I heard footsteps slapping against the wet pavement, keeping pace with me. I told myself it was just the rain hammering the side of the car. When I finally made it home, my clothes were soaked just from running from the car to the porch. I shut the door behind me, locked it, and tried to shake the image from my mind. But the strangest part came hours later, after the rain stopped. I woke up thirsty, went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and froze halfway to the sink. My window over the counter looks out toward the road. Through the dim light of the street lamp, I saw him, the same coat, the same hat, standing at the edge of my yard, head low, facing the house. Even from that distance, I could see the glint of his eyes. I didn't go back to bed that night, and I don't drive Coal Hollow anymore. 12. The Last Passenger. It was one of those nights where the world seemed to have folded in on itself, every sound swallowed by the storm. My shift had started like any other. Clock in, check the tires, run the route sheet. But by the time the rain started drumming against the roof of the depot, I knew I'd be making most of my runs empty. Folks around here don't ride at night unless they have to, and they sure as hell don't come out when the sky looks like it's about to tear itself open. The shuttle was an older model, the kind that rattles even when idling. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered now and then, their hum a constant reminder of how much I hated the graveyard shift. But it paid well enough, and I'd long since learned to keep my own company. By the third loop through town, I still hadn't picked up a single passenger. The rain was falling harder now, a steady curtain that blurred street lamps into bleeding halos. My windshield wipers thudded back and forth like a slow heartbeat. Then, just past the corner of 4th and Miller, an intersection I'd passed 100 times without incident, I saw him. He stood at the far end of the bus stop back to me, coat collar turned up high against the wind, a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his head, the rain sliding off in sheets. I almost kept going, but something, habit maybe, made me brake. The man stepped forward without looking up, moving with a kind of deliberate slowness. He boarded without a word, and the first thing I noticed was the smell, damp earth, like wet leaves rotting in a ditch. He fished into his coat pocket, pulled out a small handful of coins and dropped them into the fare box. They clinked dully, not the bright ring of quarters, but a flat, almost tired sound. The coins were strange. The edges were worn smooth, the faces faded until the designs were barely ghosts. One looked like it might have been silver once, but the metal had dulled to a sullen grey. They were slick, as if they'd been in water for years. He walked to the very back of the bus and sat down, his hat still low. I never saw his face, just a vague outline, broad shoulders, stillness like carved stone. We drove in silence. The rain pounded harder, slapping against the glass like handfuls of gravel. Street after street slid past, empty and lifeless. Every so often I glanced in the rearview mirror. He hadn't moved, didn't even seem to breathe. I could see the outline of his hands on his knees, fingers long and pale against the dark fabric of his trousers. Something about the air in the bus felt wrong, colder than outside, though the heat was on. I kept my eyes forward and told myself it was just the weather getting to me. When we reached the end of the route, I pulled into the small turnaround lot by the old feed mill. Normally, I'd let the bus idle for a moment, give passengers time to gather their things. But the man in the back didn't stir. I stood up and called down the aisle. Last stop. Nothing. I walked back, the bus rocking slightly under my steps. My boots squeaked on the wet rubber flooring. When I reached the back row, my stomach gave a little lurch. The seat was empty. Rainwater clung to the fabric, soaking a dark patch where he'd been sitting. Droplets ran down the aisle toward the front, though the doors had been shut the whole time. On the floor, near the edge of the seat, lay one of his coins. I bent to pick it up. It was freezing, not just cold from the night air, but so cold it bit into my fingertips, sending a shiver up my arm. The metal seemed heavier than it should have been, as though it was pulling at my hand. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, meaning to look at it later, but all I could think of then was getting back to the depot. On the drive back, the bus felt even emptier than before, the lights above casting sickly yellow pools that didn't quite reach the corners. Every creak of the frame made me glance into the mirror, half expecting to see that wide-brimmed hat again. By the time I clocked out, the storm had eased. I went home, hung my jacket on the back of the kitchen chair, and collapsed into bed. I didn't sleep well. At some point in the night, I dreamed of water. Black, endless water. I was standing in it up to my knees, the current tugging gently at my legs. Far off, I could hear the clink of coins, like they were being counted one by one. When I looked down, my hands were full of them, wet and shining in the dim light. I woke just before dawn, the dream clinging to me like the smell of rain. My jacket was still where I'd left it, but when I reached into the pocket for the coin, it was gone. In its place was a damp, crumpled bus ticket. No date, no time. Just a single word printed where the destination should have been. Return. I never saw the man again. But sometimes, on nights when the rain comes hard and the streets empty out, I catch myself slowing down at that stop on 4th, and Miller, half afraid, half expecting, to see him waiting there, and if I do, I think I'll keep driving,